Hello, my name is Eric Higgins, and a little bit about me is I'm looking to major in chemical engineering. Now, whenever I say this, I normally get the same reaction. Oh, wow, you must be really smart. I never quite know how to respond to it. You see, growing up, I was always in the advanced classes. For middle school and into high school, I was always taking the hardest math and the most advanced science courses I could. This carried on until around the 10th grade. I had my courses set out for me. 2 SITS literature classes, calculus A, B, and chemistry were the hallmark of my education. But there was a small problem. My attendance started to tank. Bad. See, I remember walking through the hallways at school and thinking to myself, man, I haven't felt happy in a couple days. Sometime later, I thought back, man, I haven't felt happy in a couple weeks. And soon that number had reached months. Before I knew it, I had fallen into a cycle of depression, and coupled with this was an anxiety disorder. I'd have major anxiety attacks before school to the point where I just wouldn't go. And skipping class avoided that anxiety attack, but would also make it attending the school the next day all the more difficult. I was taking medication for my depression and anxiety, but normally this type of medication takes about a month to actually take effect. And in that period, I made the decision that I would try marijuana. It was great. I'd smoke, and my worries would fade away, along with my responsibilities to go with it. Going into my junior year, I had gotten myself stuck. This drug was starting to consume my life. I stopped playing soccer, a sport I had cherished for over a decade. My attendance continued to degrade, and I dropped out of all these classes that took up valuable time that could be spent smoking. Soon, that wasn't enough. My addiction worsened. I no longer smoked to feel good. I smoked to feel normal. And now I was back at square one. Still depressed, my anxiety was still out of control, and this time I had an addiction to go with it. Alcohol followed. I was looking for an outlet, an escape, and I didn't care what filled that hole. Soon enough, I no longer drank alcohol to have fun, to feel good when I was down. I was drinking to feel normal, or whatever my deluded perception of normal was. My self-worth couldn't go much lower. I was suicidal and without hope of things getting better. I had no prospects, dreams, or aspirations. That's when I started taking pills. Pills were dangerous. I experimented with a variety of them, some from more sketchier sources than others, but I settled on a drug called dextromethamphetamine. It was 10 hours of euphoria followed by 2 weeks of absolute dread. My body weight would shift wildly during these times too. With missed meals and dehydration, I was degrading. Beneath all of this was another health condition. Weed-induced psychosis isn't something talked about all too often, but it can present itself as anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, and other disorders. If you stop smoking quick enough, these side effects are only temporary. But I hadn't stopped quick enough. In fact, I had developed bipolar disorder. Like the pills I talked about earlier, people with bipolar disorder experience periods of mania and depression, and in my case, each period lasts around 1 to 3 weeks. Now, the periods themselves are crippling in their own respect, but the largest danger for a person with bipolar disorder is the transition periods. The time spent changing from mania to depression, or vice versa. During these times, I was at my most volatile. My mood fluctuated rapidly and my temper with it. I remember having these periods of rage. Typically, when I was alone, my blood would start boiling and my skin would crawl. I'd lash out on anything and everything around me, punching and smashing objects until my fists bled. And so, the cycle continued. I didn't take my meds, and even if I did, its effects were severely diminished due to the marijuana inhibiting it. I remember one episode began simply because I had lost my vape. I started to panic, searching frantically everywhere I could think of. But this episode was different than the others. See, I had convinced myself that my dog had swallowed my vape. To put it simply, I had lost touch with reality. I met up with my girlfriend at the time and spent the night with her. She had a vape. All was well, until it was time to leave. I realized once I got home that something was off. My head was racing, and my thoughts, logical or not, were not my own. I spoke everything that came into my head. I texted friends that I hadn't talked to in years about things that should have been left unsaid. I texted family members out of the blue and without subject. Something was wrong and I needed help. And with my parents being at work, they couldn't answer the phone. So I drove to my girlfriend's house. And from there, I only deteriorated more. I made a fool out of myself to her family and to their family friends. At one point, I was told to go home by her parents. I got in my car and didn't make it more than a mile before turning around. This is where, looking back, I think God intervened. I was driving down the road, and it was like there was a massive black curtain spanning across it, and a small driveway right before it. I got the urge to turn around in that driveway, knowing that if I didn't, I would have committed suicide. I drove back to her house, got out, and as I was walking up the driveway, I was struck by the words, "I want you, Eric Higgins. I want you." I had lived in sin for over 4 years. As my mental state deteriorated and addiction overcame me, I was in active rebellion to the Lord. A malnourished man in the middle of a psychotic break due to years of depravity, God called me by name and said, "Come home." My parents showed up soon after. Apparently, her parents had called them too. And somewhere along the way, as they were driving me home, my dad decided to take me to urgent care in St. Luke's. Another act of God, no doubt. It was expected I would be in the inpatient care program for 3 weeks. God pulled me out of it in a week and a day. During that time, God had completely shifted my mental focus. With a journal and a Bible, I was determined to sort out and write down all these racing thoughts that had plagued me. With God leading the way, I was cleared by the mental health professional there. But my trials had only begun. Once I got home, my dad led me around the house and cleared out all the drug paraphernalia that had accrued since this 4-year cycle started. After that came the friends I had made along the way. Good or not, they only knew me at my addiction, and if I was to continue, they couldn't be with me. Alone and dealing with severe withdrawal symptoms, including codependency, I needed guidance. God provided. I taught myself to be happy again through a depleted prefrontal cortex and dopamine receptors that had burned out long before the month or so it took for them to regain proficiency was dark. Luckily, I had help. My parents signed me up for Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, and through their 4-month outpatient program, I learned how to appropriately handle myself in a safe environment around people going through the same thing. It was there that I passed my first drug test, and there I got reconnected with the church, going to celebrate recovery meetings as often as I could. Through these times, God was carrying me. I'll never forget my first few church services since I had gotten back. I was terrified initially, but with messages perfectly articulated to my life thus far, I managed to sit in the open area and take diligent notes. The first church service I had been able and willing to attend in a long time. Soon after, I grew the confidence to sit with my parents at the service and even stand during worship. My time at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge ended, and I graduated, but more trials were on the way. God reconnected me with a friend I hadn't seen since high school, and through that, I started working out. I had gained over 40 pounds in 6 months. Going into the fall, I got a job. Once an obstacle so insurmountable during my addiction, it gave me structure and a purpose for the day. I loved every second of it. Through continued journaling and a Bible reading plan, my mental state had improved significantly. I no longer had an anxiety or depressive disorder, and with proper medication, my bipolar disorder was effectively gone. God had carried me out of that too. Though the road was most certainly rocky, I applied for college the following fall with the same friend and rekindled my love for chemistry. I hit the ground running my freshman year, and as my dad had drilled into me many times before, I got connected with a Christian ministry group on campus. Chi Alpha. Being as awkward as I am, this too was a leap. But through a little perseverance, I realized I had found a home, a place where I belong. Through all of this, God still saw me, called me by name, and said, "Come home." I thank God each and every time I'm able to grow in a community like this one.